John, mate, welcome to the show,
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
mate. You're a legend in the martial arts community. I heard about you in Blitz, a martial arts magazine. So for those people that don't know, Blitz Martial Arts magazine has been around forever. I can remember back in the early '90s, but you originally started Blitz. Was that correct, John?
Yeah, I started it. Believe it or not, I started in my lounge room with a Commodore 64 and pretty much wrote it all and did it all myself. It was as a reaction to an overreaction, some would say, to Australia's original magazine, which was Australasian Fighting Arts. I wrote an article about what we would now describe as mixed martial arts back then.
Yes.
And that was not a thing. That was not a thing back then. And I got canned for that by the editor of the magazine and some of his mates. They go, "That's crap. You can't mix your martial arts. You don't know what you're doing." And I wrote back a reply to that, and they refused to publish it, my reply. And that got me pissed off. So then I decided to write my own magazine so I could write my reply and try to put them out of business. And it took exactly 10 issues.
Yes. Wow, John. Wow.
So a little bit of an overreaction, but it was good.
Why?
Good for Australia, And then I kind of lost interest in doing all that. I gave that magazine to a friend of mine, Silvio Morelli, who took it over and did a much better job in the idea of publishing, because he turned it into a publishing company and added a whole bunch of other magazines and grew it really big. But I had the first, I think it was 10 issues.
Yeah, because you've appeared on numerous covers of Blitz Martial Arts magazine, and I was a subscriber back in the early '90s. But why did Blitz stop? Like, why didn't it keep going?
Well, it's only been the last 2 or 3 years or 4 years or something. But it stopped because I don't know how many magazines have died, but they've died because print media is not a thing now.
That's right.
This is what we're doing is the thing. So, it had a great life, and but there's a lot of magazines. I mean, we used to go into magazine stores. There's magazines everywhere. No one does that anymore. So you might find it at the airport or something. I don't know, but yes, it just died a natural death, and digital's taken over.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. I had a friend come over the other day and we sat down and watched a movie, and it's just amazing. Like I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and I can remember very vividly going to the video store and renting out, my favorite movies like Bloodsport and Kickboxer, Bruce Lee. Now everything's just so instantaneous, John. Log on, watch a movie. It's pretty incredible, mates.
Yeah, things have changed.
Yeah. So John, take me back, mate. You were the first ever Australian to be awarded a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and an incredible feat, mate. Like incredible. But can you take me back to when you first were introduced to martial arts? How old were you when you started?
Martial arts, I started with wrestling actually. When I was 14, did wrestling. So that's what I was really into. And then when I turned like 16, I think maybe I got into karate and did, had a stint in karate and taekwondo and that kind of stuff. So I was training in that until I finished my high schooling when I was not 18, but 17 and a bit. And then when I finished school, I took off to Southeast Asia to, make my way around. I was inspired by an author called Don Drager, who wrote a lot of books back then. And he was, he traveled all through the Indonesian archipelago, Thailand, Malaysia, India, Japan, China, training. He was a U.S. Marine in the U.S. Marine Corps. And he was tasked to kind of do that work. He inspired me. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to follow in his footsteps and do the same thing. I'd read his books, because back then there was no videos and none of that stuff. There was just books.
Yep.
So having read Drager's books, I thought I'll do that. So when I hit 17, I took off and, Indonesia and spent a lot of time there. And then up to Thailand and then to India for wrestling and then Japan and all that kind of stuff. So
That's incredible. And I was just reading too, John, you competed in the World Silat Championships in Jakarta in 1981. That's fantastic, mate. But Silat is an interesting martial art, and it's an Indonesian martial art. But how did you dive into that martial art, that particular one?
well, I mean, there are literally, I mean, back in the mid-70s, I think there was something like 380, if I'm not mistaken, government-recognized styles of Silat. So when you say Silat, that's a very broad term. It kind of like just means like, martial arts. It's kind of like that. So there's grappling. There are styles of Silat that are pure grappling, and there are styles that are just weapons, and some with just a knife, and other styles train more like Thai boxing, and then there's all the flowery kind of crappy bullshit styles. So there's, so I wanted to train, and that's what Don Drager was fascinated by that. He actually wrote a book just on Indonesia, big book.
Wow.
On how it was the most diverse martial arts, part of the world in terms of how many, travel 15 kilometers to another village and they'd have a completely different style there. So I was really interested and fascinated by that, and just by the romance of it, you're going around and like seeing all these different things. And so that's why I kind of got into that, and I ended up training in one of the more functional kinds. A lot of Silat's not very functional at all.
Yes.
But some of it is. I mean, we had bags up, we were hitting pads and kicking bags and doing that kind of stuff and doing road work and lots of sparring and stuff. So that's the kind of one I got into, and ended up competing in their first World Championships in, I think it was 82. And,
Yes.
got lucky, won that. So and after that happened, I kind of thought, you know what, I've done enough with that, so I'll head further afield. And so then, Thailand, trained at Pachindi Gym, and then Japan, trained with Yamaguchi and Goju Kai, and went to India and wrestled a bit and in India, and then headed to Brazil in 86 or 87. So,
Yes. Yeah. And it's a fascinating journey you've been on, mate. And what an incredible journey you've been on. But what do you remember most about the martial arts scene back in the early days?
well, in those days, as I alluded to before, it was really, there wasn't really any, MMA wasn't a thing. So the cross training was frowned upon by most of the martial arts community. So the concept, in my mind, it was, you needed to mix it up, because I'd started with wrestling, so I was very happy to grapple. Grappling was a familiar thing to me, and then there was striking, and of course then we got to connect the two up, and to me it was just a very natural progression, but that wasn't not a thing in the 80s. So the martial arts community was very much compartmentalized, and I just wasn't up for that. I really liked the idea of I didn't know, it wasn't called MMA back then. It wasn't even called MMA until the UFC had been going maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years.
Yes.
Then that branding came through and it became MMA. But I was always trying to do that. But the community generally wasn't. I was seen as a bit of an outcast, a bit of a rebel back then, which is weird because now it's normal.
Yeah, it's interesting, John, because, you're right. It was almost taboo. Like if you were training in karate, it was frowned upon to go train at a different school or a different club. And it's interesting. My coach, Geordie, I'm under Black Dragon Kai, and his combat system, John, is phenomenal. We have to cross-train in different systems to level up. So I'm a second-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I also need to cross-train in Judo. I have to, one of the prerequisites is I need to train in his Judo system. If you decide to train in his modern martial arts system, one of the prerequisites is you need to get certified in Taekwondo. So you have a whole room, John, of world champions in not just jiu-jitsu, but world Muay Thai champions, but multiple black belts in different systems. But with you and your first introduction into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, can you walk me through that, John? When were you first introduced to BJJ?
Well, I heard about it when I owned Blitz and was editor of Blitz. There was a guy came out here, Marcelo Beiring was his name, from Rio, and he issued a challenge. He was out here on a surfing holiday, but he issued a challenge to fight anyone for $50,000, which is ridiculous because that in those days that's two houses. So no one had $50,000. Certainly not anyone in the martial arts community. So, but it made for a good story, right? Like Brazilian guy, $50,000, no rules, winner takes all. So I naturally published that story. No one, of course, accepted the challenge. But then in following that story up, it made me curious, who is this guy? And, what makes him so confident that he's willing to put up someone else's money, more than likely, not his own. But, knowing what we know now about guys from Brazil, there's no way he had 50K. But nevertheless, he did that. So I followed it up, and then I remember I made a few calls to some friends in America, and someone said, they're kind of like this Brazilian family, and they're all kind of connected. And there's actually one down in Torrance teaching out of his garage, which happened to be Horry and Gracie.
Wow.
I didn't know any of this. So I said, I'm going to go to America. I can do some training at the Jet Center with, Benny Urquidez, and I can do some other training that I wanted to do there. And while I'm there, I'll go see this guy and it'll satisfy my curiosity. So when I was there, and I was training with a friend of mine, Stan Longanides, who was a kickboxer, and we were at the Jet Center, and then and I went down to Torrance and did a private lesson with Horian, which in those days was very expensive. It was crazy. Like it was like $100 or something now. So like $500 for 5 private lessons.
Wow.
In those days, that was like all my money. Like that was my life savings. I didn't have any money. And I didn't have it. I had 400 and I had to borrow the last 100 off a few people to rock up to Horian and say, give me my 5 lessons worth. And he did. And I said, this is fantastic. Like,
wow.
And so I got into that. And then I came home because I had no money. So I came home back to Australia. And then with what I learned in those 5 lessons, I was trying to fight everyone I could fight. Like any Japanese Jiu-Jitsu black belts, judo black belts, taekwondo, karate guys. I didn't care. I go, can we spar? And then take them down and choke them out. And I kept doing that because I had some, I had a good single leg and a double leg from my wrestling stuff, which no one knew what the hell I was doing.
Wow.
But, and then once I was on the ground, I just did my, you can imagine what you'd learn in the first 5 lessons, right? So, but it was enough, right? And I thought I got to do 10 lessons, so but I couldn't afford it. So I thought I'll go back. I'll go down to Horian one more time. I'll do an interview for the magazine, which I still own. And I will ask him, where can I go in Brazil to learn this? Because I was figuring Brazil, third world, it'll be free.
Yeah.
But that's not true, but that was what I was thinking, right? Like Thailand and everywhere else, pay, you just turn up, right? So I went back there. Oh, sorry, I have to back up a bit. The 5th lesson of my first little 5 lessons I did, the 5th one was taught to me by Machado.
Wow.
He was only 17 or 18 at that time, and Horian had brought him up from Brazil because he was the national champion.
Yeah.
He had 360-something matches at black belt with not one loss.
That's incredible.
The best record that still stands. So he brought Hegan up to teach for him in his garage because he was, inundated with profs. So the last lesson of that first 5 that I took, Hegan taught me. So we'd made a connection. So when I came back the second time, I went to Horian's and said, can I have another lesson? And he goes, yeah, but I can't teach you. My cousin will teach you. I'm taking my kids to Disneyland today. And it was Hegan. And I was much happier about that anyway, because Hegan was into it. It wasn't just a job, right? And Hegan said, oh, my Australian friend. He remembered me because I probably gave him a hat and a boomerang or something, right? So he's going, my buddy, blah, 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 And then he said, don't train here. This is no good. you got to go to Rio. I said, well, that's exactly what I want to do. And he says, I'm going Wednesday. Come with me. And so we've been best mates ever since. So went down there.
That's incredible.
It was good. Yeah.
Wow.
I love it.
Yeah, and Hegan is a legend. I've had the pleasure of doing some seminars with Carlos Machado. So my sort of lineage, and you probably know as well. So my original instructor was Matt Cooper from Brisbane, and Matt Cooper was under Anthony Perosh, which you know as well. He was a student of yours as well too, Anthony Perosh, and Anthony Perosh is also affiliated with the Machados as well. But the Machados are phenomenal. But what was it like training with the Machados, and how were they different from the Gracies, or were they similar?
I mean, no, it was all the same. I mean, in those days, that's a branding thing that people have that perception, and a lot of it started by Horian. Horian actually sent anyone, including his cousins, if they tried to use the Gracie name. So it was very weird back then, right? He was protecting his brand and all of this stuff. Fair enough. So, but back in those days, we did it. We were just all doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. It was just Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. There was one academy, and Gracie Baja, and everyone was in that academy. In that academy was Hegan Machado, Carlos, Jean-Jacques, Johnny, Roger Machado. Henzo Gracie was a purple belt. Henzo's brothers, soccer. There was a whole lot of guys. Hyan, Helion Gracie, a lot of very well-known guys there. We're all in the same room. Everyone was in the same room. So it was one room full of these people that, 10 years later, they were all doing their own thing. They all, split to all over the place to make their own, to make a life, right? But in those days, it was one room, and everyone was in it. And I was the only gringo in there. So it was pretty unique experience, James. I didn't like all of us, right? We never know when we're in history. You don't know when you're in a moment.
Yeah.
Until you look back 20 years later and go, shit, So I didn't know. I didn't know that I was in the room with the cream of the crop in Brazil. They were just my cousins, and we used to hang out and, do jiu-jitsu. And I didn't even know, how good they were, where Hegan was on the pecking order. It was years later where I found out. I was in the room a couple of years later. It was 2 years later. 2 years later, I was back there training again, and Henzo Gracie was sitting next to me, who could speak English. Henzo Gracie could speak English, and also Carlos Machado could speak English. No one else, as far as I can recollect, could speak English. So I had Henzo sitting next to me. We were good friends. And all these guys started coming into the mat. Fabio Gurgel, a lot of well-known BJJ guys that were not Gracie Baja guys. And everyone's sort of like, wow, look at that. Who's that guy? Well, here he is. And I turned to Henzo, I said, what's going on? Like, is it a special day? Like, what's happening? Everyone's all excited and pumped up. He goes, they've come to train with him. And my friend Hegan is sitting next to me. I looked past Hegan and gone, with who? Like, I didn't have a clue. He goes, with Hegan. I go, with him? Like my goofy friend, why do they want to train with him for? And he looked at me and he said, you don't know, do you? I go, no what? Like, he says, so I didn't have a clue. They were just guys, and you know what it's like. They could have been blue belts in terms of, being able to climb me up on the mat and do what they wanted. A blue belt would have been good enough for a beginner, but I didn't know they were also, the cream of the crop in Brazil. So I lucked out. I got really lucky.
And you've done something phenomenal to the martial arts community, John. You were one of the first non-Brazilians, or Westerners, I should say, to be awarded a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You're one of the Dirty Dozen, I think. There was Chris Lauder. There was
Bob Bass, Dave Meyer.
Yep. Who was the other one I'm thinking of? It was Roy Dean's coach. can't think of his name. He just got awarded his coral belt recently. I can't think of his name. It'll come to me. But you paved the way. You've completely just reshaped the world of martial arts over here in Australia. Does that ever sort of, hit home? Like you think, wow, I've just become, the pinnacle of Australian Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
I honestly thank you for the nice compliment, but I don't see it that way. It's first of all, when someone starts something, they don't even know they're starting it. They're just doing their thing. They're passionate, they're interested, they're whatever. And no one thought back then, I can assure you, that BJJ would grow. No way. Like, BJJ is for nutcases that normal people aren't going to want to do this. So I didn't know. I didn't have any vision, or I didn't know anything. So I think the credit, if there's any credit to go anywhere, it's got to go to those. Who were the first people that said, I like this? Vinnie Perry, Vinnie Perry and
Yep.
Anthony Lange and the guys in Melbourne and stuff. It's those guys. I think the first followers, right? They're the ones that deserve the credit because they've said, this is worth doing. And then they've helped spread the whole, I'm not a religious person. I'm a full hardcore atheist, but it would be like, it wasn't good old JC, mate. It's his 12 apostles that did the work, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the credit, needs to go to those guys more than me. I was just going on this weird path that I wanted to go on, and those guys, enough people, 20 or 30 guys went, wow, that's really awesome. And then they really affected a lot of people.
Yeah.
So give them the credit. Yeah.
I mean, you're being very modest too, John. I mean, you definitely had a huge imprint into the martial arts scene in Australia. And what's interesting too, John? I've been doing martial arts for over 30 years, and I've had the pleasure of talking to many martial artists, and I had Richard Norton on my podcast, and it was fascinating, and he always says anything good that has happened in his life has been a result of practicing martial arts. And the same goes with me, John. I owe everything to martial arts. I think the greatest gift other than life that my mum ever gave me was enrolling me into martial arts. And, for your influence in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you've touched the lives of so many people, John. And I also train police, corrections, security, but also I've had a lot of students that come from domestic violence and sexual assault. I've had a female student of mine who was a sexual assault survivor, John. So little do you know the influence that you've made in so many people's lives with this amazing art. But can you talk to me about your first introduction into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? What was that like when you first were introduced to wrestling?
Wrestling or Jiu-Jitsu?
Jiu-Jitsu wrestling. So what was your first class like? Like, do you remember what that was like?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My first class was with Horian Gracie, and it basically consisted of three things. And I went in there, and I very quickly figured out that because it was Horian and Hickson Gracie was there. So, I knew, well, this is their thing. Of course, on the ground, they're going to, they need to control me and do what they want. Of course. So I actually wasn't that impressed with the fact that, Horian said, mount on top of me, try to stay there, and then he escapes.
Yeah.
Now let's switch it. I'm going to mount you, do what you want, and I couldn't get out, and he choked me, right?
Wow.
So normal. That's kind of pretty basic. But I still wasn't that impressed by that. Didn't go, wow, because of course they're going to be doing it. It'd be like if I was with a Olympic level judo guy. Of course he's going to throw me. If I was with a great Thai guy, of course he's going to kick me in the head. So it wasn't that. What it was is that he said, he came in, he said, and he clinched me, just a body inside. It was a side lateral body lock with the arm control.
Yep.
And he said, can you knock me out here? And I said, no, can't do that. Too close. He goes, okay. And then he walked back about 5 meters and he said, can you knock me out here? And I said, no, too far away. And he said, okay, get exactly at the perfect distance. Where do you want me so that you could knock me out? So I did that. And he says, here's lesson number 1. Don't be there.
Wow.
I didn't know what it was about that, but I just thought, he said, you can be anywhere in the world. Just don't have your head in that one spot. And I thought, that's not bad. It was kind of interesting to me. It flicked some little thing in my head, and I thought, that's worth doing. Okay, I'm going to come back for one more lesson. Maybe there's something more to this than. And so that was the way they were coming in, like to clinch, is terrible. Like, I'll tell you, it's just not good. They didn't know anything about the shell. They didn't know anything. There was just this crazy stuff. So, since those days, on me especially, I've worked a lot on that. But nevertheless, it was just the strategic thinking, that little fortune cookie kind of, don't be there. There's one place you can't be. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. I've never heard that before. And so that's what piqued my interest, weirdly enough, more than the filling them out and doing that. It was the thinking that got me in there, and, that led to lesson 2. And then the more you yourself, James, the more you are exposed to jiu-jitsu, the more you see. So initially, it was the simplicity of it that attracted me. You didn't have so much to get a big advantage over someone that doesn't know. You didn't have to know that much. You can beat someone in chess pretty easy that doesn't know how to play chess.
Yep.
So the simplicity got me there, but that didn't keep me there. What kept me there for 40 years was the complexity of it.
Yeah.
I think the simplicity can get you in, but the complexity will keep you there forever.
Yeah. One thing that I do recognize as well, John, at this stage, is I feel that jiu-jitsu is going very much down a route of competition. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how far martial arts has come, and especially the evolution of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I've always been fixated, John, with regards to self-defense. And I can imagine when you initially started Jiu-Jitsu, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, how it was practiced was purely for the street, for self-defense. Because it's a fascinating art. It really is. It's amazing. It's the whole analogy of David versus Goliath, where the little guy could beat the big guy, John. But how do you find the difference on how you were shown jiu-jitsu back in those days and how it's evolved today? Do you see a bit of a difference?
Well, when you say self-defense, to me that means a lot of different things. Because do we have a gun? Do we have a weapon? Are there more than one people? Are we inside a car? It's a big thing, right? So even people who say they're into self-defense and they're practicing it for that, I go, what? Like I look at it. There's different kinds of self-defense, and the way that I see or saw back then Gracie Jiu-Jitsu being taught as self-defense was mainly for kids.
Yeah.
It was Helio Gracie teaching, someone grabs you and you do this, and you do all these little self-defense kind of ideas. And now of course, Horian's sons, what's his name? Hyan and Henna?
Hyan, Henzo, Hiron and Henna. Hiron and Henna. Yeah.
They're trying to, promote the idea of their grandfather. So there's a lot of self-defense-y stuff, but self-defense stuff that well, I don't know everything about what they do, but what I've seen is, against grabbing and against these basic things. So it's kind of like, I would call it a limited kind of almost woman self-defense, kids self-defense for people who don't want to train for a long time. They just want to get some basic things. It's good for that. It's not, let's wrestle inside the car. It's not, let's pull out a gun and try to shoot each other with FX rounds in the toilet. So there's different, depends, right? Self-defense to me means a lot more.
Yeah.
But I take your point. Some people, veer more toward that. And I honestly think for a lot of people, they're saying that because they're not into the competition. They haven't got a competition team. So it's just easier to say those words, right? Because if it's really about self-defense, you need to do scenarios. You need to have people cursing in your face and just smacking and throwing shit. And I don't see a lot of that in jiu-jitsu, actually.
No.
Not even from all the people that are supposedly doing their self-defense.
That's what I mean, John. Yeah. So we pressure test with knives. So we'll actually do scenario nights. So I'll have some of my guys literally have the intent to physically pretend to cause harm. Obviously, it's a plastic knife. We're not fucking stupid, but they will actually try and stab me for real. And it is a world of hurt. It is a huge, huge point to make, especially when we're talking about grappling. Because if you have a knife and you have someone that's going to cause, harm to you, it is extremely difficult. So putting yourself in those stressful situations and scenarios like that is extremely important. But going back to obviously self-defense, I'm thinking of more from a striking perspective. So punch block protection from inside the guard, collar ties, overhooks, underhooks.
Well, that's more, that is different. I don't even put that in the self-defense category. And when I started jiu-jitsu, honestly, there might have been some self-defense. I mean, I saw Helio Gracie teaching in his house with some kids and they're doing some self-defense things, but that's the only time I saw it. And we're talking about 1986. Yeah. It was all about fighting other martial arts guys. That's all BJJ was. They weren't interested in self-defense. Like people might disagree with this, but they would be wrong. No one thought of this as I'm doing this to defend myself in the street. No, it was all about this is to prove that we are tougher and better than any other martial arts guy. It was really about fighting other martial arts guys. That's the culture of BJJ.
Yes.
That I was in, and that Chris Howder and Bob Bass, and that was what it was. And because of that, there had to be some Vale-Tudo applications, like Vale-Tudo guards, where you get the guy and hold him down the guard and do all these things, assuming there's striking. So that's what it was. That's not self-defense. That is really more MMA.
Yes.
MMA from a old school jiu-jitsu perspective, which is I'm not going to learn about striking. I'm not even going to learn about covering up. I just need to do enough till I clinch the guy and then do my game. That's what it was like. Nowadays, of course, but having said that, I think it's really important. The sport is where the evolutions come from. You wouldn't get any of the evolution in BJJ if we were just doing self-defense. You wouldn't, because no one's putting up a problem that we need to solve. Then we're going to come up with a better solution. They come up with a better problem. You're not going to get that escalation if it's just self-defense. You just keep doing really basic, silly, not silly, but you know what I mean. And also another thing, you wouldn't do it for 30 years. No, right? Jeff Thompson, do you know who Jeff Thompson is?
Love Jeff Thompson.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jeff and I was training him and a whole bunch of his bouncer mates and stuff a few times in England. We had lots of talks about this stuff. And one of the things, like, he's got this really simple formula. Put up a fence, ask a question, and then knock you out. Like, now, there's a whole lot of science behind that.
Yeah.
And there are very, very technical parts to the mechanics of how you do it. But that's all it is. We call it the formula. Fence, question, go.
Yeah.
But here's my take on that. When I've told this to Jeff 100 times, but how long will people do that on a cold winter's night to the point where they're going to get really, really good at it? They don't. They're bored shitless after 2 weeks because, rightly or wrongly, in their mind, they go, I got it. Give me something else. And I said to him, you need to do that. You need to JKD it up, or, whatever you want to call it, have a whole lot of stuff, even if you don't believe in that stuff, because that'll keep them there long enough to keep doing reps of that to the point where it is effective. So if you're not able to retain people long enough to do the simplest thing's not going to work either. So I think that we need complexity in things to keep people there long enough to get good at the really fundamental things.
Yes. Yeah. It's fascinating, John, because I think you've made some really good points as well. So if we're regarding self-defense, there's a whole broad spectrum of things. So, for example, yes, 100%, it's probably a death wish to go to the ground against multiple attackers. But what if you get taken to the ground against your will? You need to learn how to get back to your feet. So grappling is obviously in sport an important skill. Another thing as well is, an altercation happens at a barbecue. Maybe it's one of your relatives. You don't really want to be doing a 50-move kata on his head. We can use control and restraint. We can hold them down. Grappling works exceptionally well for bullying, for kids. It's not advisable for another child to hit another child in the playground. They can use grappling and hold the bully down. There's a time and a place for grappling, but there's a time and a place for striking too. But one thing especially that I think is very interesting too, John, is a lot of people don't talk about the laws. And you've trained police, you train about the laws. Yeah. So there was a viral video of an Australian mixed martial artist who I had on my podcast, Victor Lyle. He intervened in a street fight. These two individuals were stomping on another dude's head. He's gone in and protected the guy that was getting kicked. The other two guys have now turned onto him, so he's had to kind of, protect himself. He's kicked this guy in the head. He's gone down. But thank goodness, no one was hurt. But it was a fascinating video. But at the same time, that could have just ended in so many different scenarios. What if he hit the guy? The guy's gone down, hit his head on concrete, and he's died. But what do you believe are some of the key principles that are essential when talking about self-defense?
In relation to law?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think one of the, when people come to my school, if you don't mind, I'll just talk about my academy because there's a reason why I've structured it the way it is. I've got lots of different levels of classes. I've got beginners, novice, intermediate, advanced. But when they first come to my school, their first 3 months of training, they come into my beginner class. They are coming for a variety of reasons. Some say, I'm here to do jiu-jitsu. I know what it is. I want to do it. Some say, is this a martial arts school? So I should take up martial arts because it's something to do. They don't know who we are, who I am. They don't know anything. They're just wandering. There are other ones that say, I want to be a UFC fighter. There are other ones that say, I need to learn self-defense because I've been beat up. So they're coming from so many different. It is incumbent upon me to teach some self-defense. Right?
Yes.
Because so I have to, because it's almost like a duty of care. I have to do it because if they've said anywhere that that's what they're there for. So I've got a bunch of classes, like 12 classes that are pre-designed. You can turn up any night on the beginner nights and you might come at class number 4. You do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then you start again. So you've got to run through those 12 classes 2 times before you get into my actual classes. 24 classes, your probationary classes. In those classes, we're trying to achieve a number of things. BJJ basic, self-defense strategies for the street. So we're doing a number of things. And over the many, many years of doing this is people have been assaulted between my school and their car on their first night.
Wow.
So I can't be teaching them something, even if it's effective. Let's say boxing. If it takes 12 months to get good enough to slip, weave, and move, no, they're getting assaulted in 85 minutes. So I take the approach that they're going to be assaulted on their way to their car after their first lesson. So, we teach fence, question, slap, double, we teach these basic things. And when someone's getting in your face, we have a fence up, they're moving back. The first thing is disengage.
Yes.
You try to disengage. I can't disengage. He's pursuing me. I'm in fear of my life. Ask a question, preempt, let's say. But one of the things we emphasize is it's really important that not only because this is what you should do, ethically, try to disengage. Optics. Someone's videoing this.
Yes.
So when if you go forward and then go, what do you say, and crack, and then something bad happens, you've got a problem. So one of the first things we get people to do is always they're taking a step back, fence up. They try to do it again. Guy presses a second or third time, then we can preempt and get into our training.
Yeah.
Two of my students, one in Australia and one in America, have been in a situation where they have taken that first shot, the guys died.
Wow.
Neither of them went to jail.
Really?
Because it was on security camera and phone. It was clear they didn't want to fight. Back away. They didn't want to. Oh my God, this is not going away. Bang, bang. Right. So the optics of it, right? So that little tiny idea of don't go forward, just go back, have your fence up. If someone's videoing this, that'll stand in good stead in court later on.
Yes.
You look like you didn't want a part of it, irrespective of the outcome.
Yeah.
I'm not giving legal advice here, but you get the picture. So it's things like that, do people, weaving things like that. How should we be dealing with, we're not in our martial arts stance yet. The fight's not even started. How are we dealing with what we call pre-fight? What is the pre-fight scenario like? So you have to do some of this. So I put some of those in the beginner classes, a bit of training on that. A bit of training on some shell covering up when someone's just throwing 300 shots at your head and not getting a mark on you. Then we do some takedown work, and then we do some BJJ work on the ground, and then we hit some pads. So it's a bit of a smorgasbord, and that allows people to, when they have to do 4 of those lessons, just any 4, like number 5, 6, 7, 8, or number 11, 12, 1, 2. They have to do 4 of them before we'll even say, we want you in our school, or they say, we don't want to be there. So before we get people joining, they have to do the 4. So they can make a much better decision about, is what we're doing suiting their needs? And we can make a decision, are you the kind of person we want in the culture that we have here? So we do that trial. And not everyone. We go, mate, you've had 4 classes to work out the way we coach, the way to behave, the way to be a partner. And if you can't work that out in 4 lessons as an adult, you're not for us. And so 1 out of 10, we go, I'll recommend you to another school. But it's also great for them because you can imagine any 4 of those lessons, all those 12 lessons are very different. Some fence work, some BJJ work. So any 4 of them, they've got a bit of a overview of, oh yeah, this is exactly where I need to be. Or oh no, I wanted to learn how to kick people in the head, this is not for me. So I think that's really important. How you start, what's that introduction like when someone first comes into your school? And you address a little part of it is the legal aspects of what's the optics here.
Do you wish more instructors taught this stuff, John? Because I teach a broad spectrum of social cues to my students. So one of the things as well, you mentioned the fence. So that's obviously disengaging, creating distance. And Jeff Thompson was very famous of a self-defense with regards to the fence, because it also shows that your, preemptive measure is trying to avoid the confrontation, but see, your hands are already up just in case you need to burst in. You're also looking for exits. You're looking to see if they're carrying weapons. You're looking for bystanders. What if what are you grappling on if the fight does go to the ground? Are you on grass or are you on bitumen or pavement? Do you also talk about verbal jiu-jitsu, John? Because there was a fascinating video that I watched of a gentleman, I forget his name, but he was out at Eric Paulson's gym. And he was talking about a situation where a martial artist got into an altercation. He's hit this guy. The guy's gone down, hit his head on the concrete, and he's died. Yeah. And he said the point of all this shit is you avoid the fight at all costs. And he used some examples on what you could do. So one of the examples he used was, if someone says to you, what the fuck's your problem? You can just make shit up. You can just say, oh, yeah, my wife died last night and, I'm having a terrible time at work and I'm severely depressed. I just came in here and it just changed the whole thing. Yeah. So he used some examples like that to try and divert their attention into more empathy, if that makes sense. Yeah. But do you educate your students on that kind of stuff?
No, I don't. 'Cause we are talking now about, that's a specialized idea.
Yeah.
Not my students. I've done some of that work in other areas of my life where I'm dealing with teaching operatives that need to not appear anywhere. Like they can't be on anyone's radar and they can't be involved. So that, it's all about getting home, right?
Yeah.
So there are other aspects, but in my school we don't, because it's too specialized, right? It's too specialized. You'd have to, you would have to run a course on that or run a program on that or something. I've got so much stuff to cover. All I'm doing, with what I was describing before, it'd be like a buffet, here's some vegetarian, here's some noodles, here's some fruit, here's with that. Do you want to come back? Do you like the quality of our food? Blah, 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 and come back and then zero in. So no, we touch on it, but I'm not teaching it because they get enough of it, the bare minimum. They get enough because I get enough feedback over the years of, wow, the fence got me out of it. I didn't know what to do. But I remembered that and backing away and asking the questions, and it served people well. But what you're talking about, no, that's you need to train that. You can't, you're a lecturer and do it. You need to train it. Bill Kipp used to do a really pretty good job of that in America. Do you know Bill Kipp?
I've heard of him. Yeah. Who is it?
Bill Kipp was the guy who started what used to be called Bullet Man training. You wear the giant head and all the gear, and it's just scenarios. And he used to run weekend courses, and it was all about, have a fence. And the first couple of hours was just people screaming at you and you just not doing anything. People struggled with that.
Yeah, true.
And then the next part was, and all they did at the end of the weekend, it culminated in a scenario where you're here, you get grabbed, eyes, groin, kick, check your exits and run. So there wasn't any combative skills or anything. It was all scenarios, and it was inoculating you against people screaming at you and all of that sort of stuff. But even that took 16 hours over a weekend, and people had to be debriefed at the end of it because there was tears.
Yep.
So getting that across, some of that idea, as well as the verbal judo, in a class where they're also doing all these other things, there's just not enough time and you're not doing it justice. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't. But I know about it enough, and there are elements where we've done a lot of work on that, but not in my school. It's just not enough time. Yeah. That's a specialist activity.
It's a full day course. I'm guessing you would have to do it for a whole day or something. Yeah. John, have you ever been in a situation where you've had to defend yourself, or have you come close?
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
I've been in lots.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it was in Asia very early on. But, here, I don't know. 8 or 10. Not only because I have always had a problem of not being able to step backwards. Right. It was always a struggle for me to, of course, I'd never start anything. I'd never initiate, but I also would not step back. Ego, and maybe kind of like the idea of that I need to find out. You're telling me you're going to beat me up. I need to know.
Yeah.
So it's not that I wanted to instigate the fight, but now that you've brought it up and you're telling me you're going to do all this stuff, I really need to know. I'm curious, like because of that. So that's where, apart from a couple of two road rage incidents, one where a guy was just robbed a supermarket and I happened to be going in while he decked a couple of security guards, and then I got involved and took him down. But in those situations, I didn't even have enough time to get adrenalized and deal with all the fear. And I think it was just engine on, action, and jiu-jitsu served me really well because you can just choke them unconscious and tie them up.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're not damaging them. Whereas earlier on, if I won, it was because I had to ended up on the mount, bang, bang, until they stopped. That's not a great, now as an older guy and someone who feels very differently about life and people, and I understand that someone could just be having a horribly bad day. You don't know what's going on in people's lives.
Exactly.
Died, their wife left them, they lost their job, and now you've taken his car space. So so now I'm more empathetic, and of course, but even now, if I was pressed, jiu-jitsu is a wonderful thing because provided it's only one person, and that's been the last few events, only one person, then you're able to bring the fight to a conclusion with no damage. I mean, he's unconscious and he wakes back up, and he's probably goes, "What happened?" And then you're not even there anymore. So that's a pretty nice outcome.
I love chokeholds, John. I've always gravitated towards chokeholds, and I'll have to send you a video, John, but probably over the last 4 or 5 years, I've mucked around with hoodie jumpers and jackets, and I've modified some of the techniques that you do in the gi to apply to self-defense. And I tell you what, John, that hoodie jumper is like a hangman's noose. It is a fascinating grappling tool. Have you tried any of that stuff before? Have you modified some of the chokes that you do in the gi to try and work in for clothing?
Yes. And, normal street clothing is not in my school, in other areas of my work. And even then it equally importantly, if not more importantly, is the environment. Like it's different in a car. That's very different than in
it is. Yeah.
I mean, I was engaged at one point. Who was I teaching? I was over in Quantico, over in America. And I was there to help design a program for a specific group of people. And they had a $5 million facility built just for 12 people.
Wow.
Just for these people. No other people, not for teaching, just for research and development. So you can imagine it was a beautiful facility. Mat was this thick. It was very comfortable. And, fake car made out of foam and all these different things. And then we had this big training area, like, I don't know, it was probably about 200 square meters of mats. And it was day 4 or day 5 where we were doing 10 or 12 sessions on groundwork with the focus on disengagement. So the opposite to, a UFC guy or a fighter or us, it was about, we're in a grapple. I need to get dominant position onto knee ride so I can disengage without him, right? And then the task was to get away and get through that door over there. But that requires skills. So you can't disengage from under the mount. You can't disengage even from on the mount. You get up, they grab your legs and stuff. So you've got to go to knee ride or north-south. North-south's the best. When you're in north-south, they can't stop you disengaging. So anyway, that was a simple task. And we had 10 or 12 hours to get to that point. Like enough ground skills to be able to hit north-south or knee ride so that then you could disengage, try to get through the door, and they're chasing you down. If you get through your door, yay. But then that was on this giant mat, 200 square meters. So no problem. And then next morning, the first thing I did was let's go into the toilet and see if the same thing worked. Big problems.
Wow.
Because, you haven't got that mat space.
Yep.
You're not doing a hip escape, so suddenly nothing changed in terms of the training, except that the environment of a toilet and where these particular people were going to do some amount of their work was going to be in very small spots overseas. And so, that a lot of people they don't realize how much the environment affects, their strategies and their training. And so they ended up getting, after that, one of the first things they did was get a whole bunch of giant foam walls that you could put them together with Velcro and create little cubicles and corridors and things like that to create different scenarios. And then suddenly a lot of the stuff that they were doing previously wouldn't work. You couldn't throw the front kick. There was no room to do it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, John.
So
John, have you
just environmental, not just clothing. Sorry, I went off topic. But
no.
So different clothing, different thing, then heat, light, temperature, all this stuff affects outcomes. And then you can go further if you want to go down the rabbit hole. You can do, drug induced. Like what if you're,
yep.
And then how do you perform then? So, there's a lot to it. It is a vast landscape. And
fascinating.
And really it requires a lot of specialists, who it's like medicine, right? You might go to hospital, there's a problem, but there's 4 specialists all looking at you, and we figure out that Freddie's the guy you need because of your particular condition. Self-defense is kind of like that. You can start at a very low level, basic self-defense, and you're talking about like a general practitioner, like a doctor.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff that requires a specialist because of the environment you're in or the kind of work you're doing. And then you've got to find the specialists and tailor the training for that person. So,
John, there's a competition. I don't know if it is in Germany. I don't know where it is, but it's called car jiu-jitsu. So have you seen this? They're in the car, and then they can use the seatbelt to choke them out. Right. And what was your reaction when you saw that?
Great. Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
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 There are a million rabbit holes, and someone's got to go down them, and all kudos and respect to the people who do that, because no one person can do all the work. Like in a hospital, it requires a whole lot of different specialists, and together you've got hopefully enough of solutions in there to fix whatever problem you walk in with. But it requires people, it's a lot of specialization.
And notably, Henna and Huron Gracie have done some amazing work, especially with law enforcement, also essential services, service workers as well. They've developed what's called the safe wrap. And the safe wrap is for those people that don't know, it's like an arm wrap, and then also a configuration with the legs. It's a 2 people where they hold them down. And especially too, as well, John, because you've also worked with police too. You worked in law enforcement. What were some of the tactics and techniques that you would sort of help the officers?
Well, yeah, with policing, which is different than military, which is different than military police. I mean, it's all very different. Military police are trying to arrest their buddies who are drunk. That's a different person than, say, Special Operations Group is trying to get some really bad guy who wants to kill you. So they're different. In overseas military, you might be on a vehicle checkpoint, and someone's just wanting to get through that vehicle checkpoint to get to the village to see their sister who's pregnant. Well, you can't butt stroke them and shoot them. So it's quite amazing, how much variation there is when we talk about self-defense, and even law enforcement. What kind of law enforcement? Military police? Is it federal police? Are you doing it on a boat? Are you doing it on land? Are you a fisheries and wildlife officer who is there by yourself and there's 3 guys and you're saying you're going to take their boat off them? Look, right. So, it's all very different. So, but so it's a difficult question to answer. But with policing, like basic policing, they need to, doing 2-man systems. We used to do that like 30, 35 years ago. One of the first things I did for VicPol was work out basic handcuffing against non-compliant people. Not complying, you don't need training. No. So there's no way he wants you to handcuff him. So one takes the ankles. His job's just to hold on because now the guy has no guard. And guard meaning mobility, kicking, getting up, something like that. And then the other one goes around, gets a Kimura on from north-south, and then walks back around to the belly, which turns him to his belly, and then you cuff him up. So simple things like that, you can do that in 2 or 3 hours and get everyone really good at 2-man cuffing against non-compliant people. So that was important. Covering up with different kinds of structures, especially for the women, but that was really important too. When people come flailing in, how to not get hurt. So save yourself before you can get control, before you can arrest them. You've got to prioritize. And so
Yes.
Covering up, really important. There's a whole science to that, how to do it with various structures, and the way you design the class and develop it so that it starts out very easy and it's progressive. So after 4 or 5 hours, you can punch on and no one's getting hurt. So that's really important for police officers. That cuffing, if I had to pick just 2 things, but then it gets too specialized. It depends on, people that are vehicle checkpoint, VCP overseas, like military. As I said, they're not shooting people because all their troubles are about someone just wants to get to the village and they're not letting them through, but they want their sister, and so it's not an enemy. It's not a bad guy. It's just someone that is desperate to get there and you've been told no one comes in. So then you have to know things like fence, arm drags and soft measures that are all about control, because you can't just be butt stroking with the gun and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
there was a place, John, somewhere in the States, and I believe it's mandatory that the officers get a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. Do you think more police should train more in grappling? Because I think some of the horror stories you hear about when you hear about arrests going wrong, especially we can talk about, the George Floyd incident a few years ago where an officer knelt on his neck for about 14-something minutes. But I think an officer without training is an accident waiting to happen. But do you think that more grappling programs should be introduced to the police force?
It should be tailored. Again, I'm getting back to what kind of police, what's your environment, what you go and ask simple questions like, what are your incidents? You got to start with data, not you want, not what I want. What happens? And they should have data. Oh, what actually happens is, this kind of stuff. Oh, okay. So then you tailor it for that. That's the ideal. A lot of people, they haven't got the budget. A lot of people to do this.
Yeah.
So, so then it comes down to you can do some striking, but it's not a good look. the optics are not good for the police, and it's not effective because you have to damage them so much to make them stop if they're really non-compliant. That wow, that's no. So defense and grappling, and by getting good at grappling, they're also way harder to take down than a non-grappling person.
Yes.
Right, which leaves them on their feet with more options, meaning to disengage and do this and that. So if I had, it's mainly like if you teach a basic DTs, defensive tactics for basic law enforcement with no budget, then I'd say shell work and some basic groundwork.
Yes.
From two
Yes.
view, on top to control and on the bottom to protect and get back to your feet.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which, you can get some really good things because you're cutting out a lot of stuff. You just got to trim the fat, get down to the things that really work, the high percentage stuff that you can teach to people who don't want to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And John, some of your notable students, George Soteropoulos, Anthony Peros, Elvis Sinisig, who have also, those three guys have fought in the UFC. Their preparation of what they do for mixed martial arts. Talk to me about that, mate. How did you help them with regards to their training?
In those days, that was early days of the UFC. The approach is very different now because people have realized they can make a living. So they are willing to invest the time in for a future that may or may not appear 3 to 5 years from now. Back in those early days, that no one had a long vision like that. It was like, will I do good tonight or not? That's it. So nowadays, the approach is much more, you need to be well-rounded with a specialty. But you need to be, you can't just do one thing. You've got to know, if you look at Duplessis, it's pretty simple, right? He's got solid groundwork, just solid, not great, but good enough. He covers up every single time. He's not there trying to outbox the guy. He covers up. When he hits the guy, he's just hitting hard. It's very simple. Champion. Because he's, let's say, well-rounded at these three things. But in those early days, people did well when they weren't well-rounded. They had George, for example, good on the ground. He was a black belt at my school. So once you got to the ground, you're going to win. But then what happened was, so as long as he was doing that, he was winning. And then it got into his head that, oh, this guy's a striker. I need to be well-rounded. So I'm going to fight him at that game. That's when it went south. In those early days, the people who stuck to their strength did well.
Yes.
So there was a bit of a time where people thought correctly, if they had a long-term view, they thought I should get into these other aspects, wrestling, kickboxing or boxing. But but in the short term, those extra skills are not going to do you any good. They're going to make it worse for you. In the long term, it's going to be really good for you. So I think what people needed to do was separate out what I need to do to win this fight tonight. I need to stick to my thing. And they weren't doing that. They were going, oh no, I'm a mixed martial arts guy. I need to be good at all this stuff. And they tried to do it all. What? That is not a great idea. So they should have separated out what's their long-term training like and what do they need to do tonight. It's like you earn money this week. Some of that money is about this week. Pay your rent, buy your food, and some of it is about 30 years from now, right, when you retire. They are two different things, right? And so I think when it comes to those guys in their training, they were in that weird time period. If they had been a little earlier and just stuck to their skill set, they would have had lots more wins, right, and become champions. But they were in this time zone where they thought, oh no, this is going to be a thing, a career. I need to showcase striking, takedown, and everything. And no. Whereas nowadays, people start out mixed martial arts, they're starting all those three things at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, so,
and you got in early, John. Like you started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu way before the UFC. Did you have any idea? I mean, you must have known when Hoist jumped in. You probably already knew that he was going to win.
I felt,
yeah. But I mean that to be in that era, you know, especially, you know, been involved in different martial arts, and then obviously the rise of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it would have been an amazing time, especially because everyone was sort of in Bruce Lee mode, weren't they? Like to be grappling was kind of unusual. What do you think?
it was like having a superpower.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like having X-ray vision when no one else had it or something. And it felt that way. You know, we always like, wow, we have a secret, you know. So it was great. And, you know, we used to make some money by betting, you know, bet $50 and my mate and then you feel the guy and you know within 10 seconds we can finish anytime you want, but you don't. So you extend it out and let him nearly win and then get on top so they'd have another go and double their money and you'd make... Yeah, we used to do all that kind of weird shit. Because we had no money. We had to find ways to pay for our food and things.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a secret until the UFC. But even after the UFC, James, people still thought that was a fluke. And I would say it was only about maybe UFC 3 that people went, oh no, hang on, there's something in this. And even then, it was only people who were fighters, like wrestlers or fighters or martial arts guys who were doing jiu-jitsu. I think it didn't become mainstream, like the public. Like, I mean, there were people last night in my school, they'd never done any martial arts and it was their first night. 3 guys walk in and 2 guys and 1 girl. Clueless. They didn't know anything about martial arts. They don't know who I am. They don't know anything. They just walk up the street because they said, we want to do martial arts before, you know. Now we've got normal people, but I don't think normal people were coming into BJJ until early 2000, I'd say 2005 or something.
Yes. Yeah. One of the most amazing UFC fights I watched was when Hoist Gracie fought Dan Severn, and Dan Severn was like 100 and something kilos, like just like a classic David versus Goliath. And Hoist was on his back for about 15 minutes, and he eventually rendered him with a triangle choke. And it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life, that someone that's smaller and weaker can overpower a much stronger person. But back in those days, John, I mean, it just wasn't heard of. But now everyone's cross-trained, you know, especially in mixed martial arts. You've got to know, you know, boxing, you've got to know Muay Thai, you've got to know wrestling. There's been many situations where high-level jiu-jitsu guys have been in the UFC, but then, you know, guys know how to sprawl and brawl.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to be very well diverse now, don't you?
A lot of jiu-jitsu guys suffer from the same problem that the traditional martial arts guys suffered back then. They just thought, what I'm doing is good enough or worse, it's the best. They thought that, and then that was proved otherwise. And now that everyone's doing cross-training, a lot of jiu-jitsu guys say, no, I just need jiu-jitsu. No, mate, no, you don't. You need to be well-rounded. But it's just a metaphor for life. Like, and that was the way, when I started out, I wanted to cross-train because my experience in Asia, getting into lots of fights there, because I was working for some police groups, undercover and stuff, and, you know, lots of these fights went to clinch. So I just knew you need to know how to do that. So I think that now it's a different world. You know, people know you need to be well-rounded now, but there's still plenty of people who think, no, I'll just do this one little thing. And then once their range changes, then it's all tears. That point,
Yeah.
you need to be well-rounded anyway. Like my initial reason was I knew I needed to be well-rounded for fighting, but it came from a deeper place. I wanted to be a well-rounded human being, right? So if I'm going to be well-rounded as a human being, I'll be well-rounded in my martial arts, in my fitness, and my diet, and my travel. So I need to be like, I don't want to be locked into I've been forced through my work to become a specialist at some things, of course, but I think being a generalist is what you need to be to do well in life. You need to know how to invest, and not just in shares, but shares in property and crypto. You need to be well-rounded. You need to be well-rounded in thinking, philosophy. You need to be well-rounded in lots of things if you want to have the agility and adaptability to do life well. A specialist now in a fast-changing world is not great. You can be caught out unless the conditions perfectly match your speciality. The world changes so quickly that, week by week with the news and political things and stuff and wars, and things change all the time. And you need to be able to adapt and do that. To adapt, you have to be well-rounded. So not just as a fighter, everything. I think in everything you need to be well-rounded.
Yes.
For me, mixed martial arts, let's call it well-rounded martial arts, needs to then, if you believe that, you need to be able to translate that into, that's also how you live your life.
Yeah. What has martial arts taught you about life, John? Like how has martial arts helped you overcome obstacles, adversity, setbacks? How has martial arts helped you throughout the difficult moments in your life?
An infinite number of ways. But some concrete examples might be, okay, so you're underneath side control. I'll talk about jiu-jitsu specifically. You're underneath side control. I've got you in side control. Another black belt's got you, and he's got you. So if he's good enough to get you there, you already failed 15 times. So don't think it's going to be easy, and don't think you got some trick. So your mind under there being squashed, being held, you do most people, they come up with this instinctive question in their head. Can I escape? And the answer comes back, no. It doesn't feel like I can escape. Because we're asking the wrong question. The question should be, can I improve my situation by 5%? And then can I do it again? And then can I do it again? That you can do. Can you escape? No. No more than you can lose 35 kilos this weekend. No more than you can get out of 100 grand of toxic jet ski debt in a week. But can you improve by 5%? Well, yeah, you can just go keto for the weekend. You can not go out and drink piss and eat pizzas this weekend and save the money. So we can always do the 5% improvement. So do that within side control 4 or 5 times. Now my side control is only 80% effective on you. And now you can start to get away. So that's a very simple idea. When you're on the mat, everyone who trains for any length of time works out they can make these little small improvements. The trick is to learn to notice that you've done them.
Yes.
Right? Because we're not very good at noticing. Because how did we get 40 kilos overweight? We didn't notice when we were 1 kilo. We didn't notice when we were 2. We didn't know, because if you noticed, you wouldn't do it. So you didn't notice. We're not good at noticing. So we're not good at noticing when our situations are degrading. Therefore, logic says you're not very also good at noticing when your situation is getting better. So it's the noticing bit. So that's why on the mat, we learn details, attention to detail. It starts to train people to notice very small little things that make a big difference. And when people become PhDs in noticing, they then apply that to name it, diet, investing, relationships. So I think there's one of 10 examples I could give. But that's a concrete example that I would not have known anything about that if it hadn't been for the mat.
Yes. And that's what a great analogy, John, that you just described as well. And most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Kaizen, which is a Japanese, I believe, proverb that regards of slow, continual improvements. So just 1% better every day.
Yeah.
And then that's the key to life. And, you know, if it's, as you said, investing stocks, crypto, shares, or if it's losing, you know, some body weight, just making continual improvements. And it's the same sort of mindset that you apply on the mat. Many times I've been stuck under side control. I've got a good friend of mine, Scotty Bowden, who's also a jiu-jitsu black belt. And rolling with him, you know, he's like rolling with Anthony Barosh. He's like a hippo. He gets on top of you. It is fucking hard work. Like, I am literally exhausted trying to get out of his side control. He's got pressure, but I know that if I make small little adjustments, inch by inch, you know, sometimes I can get out. And what a great analogy that you use with side control, because, you know, it's that crushing weight of somebody on top of you. And it's kind of like life. You know, sometimes we go through hardships, we go through adversity, we go through setbacks and obstacles. Life is going to hit you from so many different angles, but you problem solve and you just make that distinction of what you can do, even if it's ever so small. But that's fantastic. But what about teaching, John? What do you love most about teaching? You know, you're a well-renowned martial arts coach, jiu-jitsu coach. What do you find most rewarding about it?
I love teaching. I've taught approximately over 28,000 classes.
Wow.
And 2,800 seminars. But after every single class, I've taken notes so that if I teach that same thing a year later, I got to improve on that all the time. But I've learned a lot. When you like, if you do anything that amount of times, like fold and make a model paper airplane, and you do 28,000 of them, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to figure a lot of things out just by sheer numbers that another person maybe will never figure out because they're just not doing the volume, right? So that's why I've just seen that has improved my thinking, my problem solving, the way I look at things slowly over time, so much so that I'm sure that I get more out of it than my students. It's so rewarding because it's the way I look at it is a problem. It's a puzzle. I'm trying to get someone to do something, or I'm trying to get someone to understand something. That's a puzzle. I need to solve it. So I solve for that. And then, you know, you learn lots of things. You learn, I mean, the very first thing, I think, when you start, you know, doing 2,000 or 3,000 classes, you learn that every single thing you're teaching, you need to break it down into a process. So it might be, you know, an arm drag. So it's not arm drag. It's like grab, control, pull, turn, clean. You know, so you get the steps. And then you describe those steps to someone else, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you'll get them to do it. And what you want is to then learn to describe it in a way that they can't misinterpret. I don't want the description to be open to interpretation because I want an exact replica of what we're doing. Right? Opposite to ecological training. So exact replica. If I'm teaching heart surgery, I'm teaching engineering. I don't want you to kind of do it, kind of work it out. I want you to do it exactly, because if you don't, people are going to die. Right? So learning that, how to break something down into the correct number of steps, how to describe those steps with the correct words. You can describe something by writing a paragraph about it, then you can describe it using just a sentence, then you can describe it using just a word. And as you're coaching, you've got to transition from a lengthy description into drop, step, fold, turn, monosyllabic instructions so that you can keep pace at the speed of life. So, that's just 2 of the 100 things that you learn about teaching mechanics when you do tens of thousands of classes. So I'm always trying to refine how to solve the problem. I've got a lot of work in my life. That's why I get hired, to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Solve the problem and then teach other trainers how to then get other people to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So problem solving ability is why they pay me, not my jiu-jitsu black belt.
Yeah. When I spoke to one of your students, Vincent Perry, and I love Vincent Perry. He's an amazing instructor, and I had him on the podcast, and I said to him, Vincent, once I got my black belt, the focus became less about me and more about my students. And I just get so much gratification and satisfaction with helping my students. I'll never forget this, John. I have a student of mine who I awarded her blue belt last year, and she trained with me for the last 6+ years. And I'll never forget, she was driving around the complex for about an hour, contemplating whether or not to come in. She was timid. She was nervous.
At the start of her training?
Yeah, yeah. Before her training commenced.
Right.
She was so nervous, John. But she forced herself. She got out of her comfort zone. She came into class, and she didn't know what to expect. But when she jumped in the class, it was just a completely different experience. How people were so kind and friendly. But 6+ years later, she's still training with me. And she's obviously had a lot of hardship and adversity and trauma, and she's overcome so many obstacles in life. But what was just amazing is just be able to change her life, John, and make such a huge positive impact in her life, and these are skills that she can take with her, everywhere. And it was a really emotional moment for me, John, when I gave her blue belt, because I've only awarded 2 females a blue belt. And it was just a really amazing experience. And I'm sure you would have experienced the same thing throughout your whole journey. Can you think of some memorable moments that have happened?
Many. And, I remember, there's people this week that admitted, like, I've come to the bottom of the stairs. I've walked up. I've gone back out. I've gone home. I couldn't do it. Big, tough guys, So we never know, we don't know by looking at people. We don't know their backstory. We don't know where they've come from, what's happened to them. We can't assume anything. And so our job is to make them feel safe and then build some little rapport, and then their mind opens up, and then we can do a job of teaching. Because you're not teaching anyone anything if they're not feeling safe and they're not feeling open. So, I've had so many people like that. I've had a guy, he died, unfortunately, several years ago now in a car accident, but he was a special guy. When he come in, couldn't look you in the eye, he couldn't make eye contact, couldn't do a star jump. 13 years later, black belt tied around his waist.
Wow.
Everyone cried. I'm
about to cry too.
All these tough guys, we're all there. Like, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, because it was, such a victory for him to do that, to get to that point, and not just the black belt, like very competent. He was a bit of a Rain Man. He could tell you who won every UFC in how long. He's like one of those guys, but he couldn't. But in the end, you couldn't shut him up. He was coming in, looking you in the eye, couldn't shut him up. And he started eventually bringing us coffees, and he'd buy a cake for someone. And now, when we pull back out, James, and we ask, what did you do? You created this guy who did really well in the UFC, or we did that. Which one are we, that made the world a better place. That made the world a better place. That made his life different. And the world is better with that version of him in it than not. So that's the stuff, right? And you're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's these this is, really, really great, super rewarding. So the fighting becomes less and less, less and less.
Yeah. And I have so many experiences, John, like from the troubled teenager that's come into the school and now just making, waves in entrepreneurship, applying their studies because of jiu-jitsu and martial arts. And then I've had the sexual assault survivor come through the door and feeling empowered and confident.
Yeah.
I've also had the bullied child that, has come through the school and just completely hated life and just transformed their whole entire life. And it's just amazing. And what a positive impact that you've made in the span of, 40, 50 years, in your martial arts journey, probably even longer than that. But John, you're a sixth degree, and I believe you're very close to coral belt. Do you think that's going to happen in the next year or so?
I couldn't care less.
Belts just don't matter anymore, do they?
I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
But having said that, a lot of my students would like that.
Yeah. I'd like to see it too, John. So I know you don't care, but I'd love to see it. I would love to see that.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. But, it's about the training and the involvement, the thinking about it. Coming up like this week, I've come up with several really great new ideas that have got some fantastic potential. That excites me, That's the bit that's important. Not the belt. I mean, I wasn't wearing my belt this morning down on that mat down the hallway there. They were a couple of black belts in there. They're Cam Rowe and Trent Rice, really good black belts. But I was just in shorts and a singlet. Just like I am.
I love it.
So
love it, John.
Belt, one day, if it happens, it'll be fine. But if it doesn't, that's fine too. So
yeah. You're a fascinating individual, John, I'm a huge fan of yours, mate. I've been doing martial arts forever and reading about you in Blitz martial arts magazines. And is there any seminars in the works, John? Are you going to come down to Brisbane or, we'd love to have you, mate. I'd love to jump in one of your seminars.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. But I was doing 120 seminars a year.
Oh my gosh! Wow!
Before COVID,
yeah.
So I've done thousands, and so
that's incredible.
After COVID, I just made a decision. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just gonna step away from that because I've got PTSD from air travel. Like not from being on the mat. I mean, if you could transport me there, Star Trek style, that'd be perfectly fine. But it's the airport, the parking, the security, going through the plane, the hotel. I am over it. So
that's
I've
fair
gone
enough.
from 120 down, and I've got to go to England, in a couple of months' time. And even then, I said to the guys last year, that's it. I'm not coming back. But I have to do 10 seminars in the first week. I've been away for 5 weeks. I'm just doing 10. Kind of everyone come to these spots. Because I find it difficult to say no to dear friends who I've known for a long time. But I set up my retirement ages ago. I don't need to be making a money living anymore. So, but I can't hard to say no to some people, but I've cut back down. So I'm probably only doing maybe 20 seminars a year, 25. I mean, to some people that might sound like a lot, but to me, that's nothing. I used to do 6 every second weekend.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's
a lot
amazing.
Of travel. But my wife now, even with those ones, she's coming with me. That makes it a lot better because she's a black belt. She's on the mat, and that makes me feel happy that my family's, she's there, and we can enjoy our time together like as a holiday.
Yeah. And John, your school is Red Cat, is that correct?
Yeah.
Red Cat, and you're in Geelong, Melbourne?
Geelong, which is about an hour out of Melbourne, down toward the coast. Yeah.
And so people can obviously find you. Are you big on the socials, John? But otherwise,
I do
where can people...
I'm on Facebook. I'm old school. I'm not doing Instagram. I'm not doing any of that stuff. I just do Facebook, and I usually write a post every day, and I try to put something useful, not just here's my cat. Like I'm not trying to I'm trying to post something that's, something I've learned that's been very useful for me. So Facebook, they can find me on Facebook if they want to do that.
Yeah. Amazing, John. I could talk to you for hours, mate. I really enjoyed sitting down and chatting with you. But John, just wanted to thank you again, mate, for jumping on.
Pleasure. No worries. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah.
Shut those windows, buckle up that house. I hope that everyone's okay up there with this cyclone heading your way.
Yeah. Any news in your area, John?
No, I'm too far south. There's nothing down here.
No, all good. Yeah. Excellent, mate. No, happy to hear that.
All right. Thanks very much.
Awesome, John.